hear that and think to myself, who could that be? Carson and I are in the house. It's probably, like, none of that happens, like, immediately. I didn't think anything. I immediately, like, swiped, right? Because I have a fight instinct. So when someone has experienced something traumatic, and that's when it overwhelms our ability to cope, right? Our ability to respond. When someone has been through something traumatic, it's like that alarm never goes off. They can't stop being in that state of fight, flight, or freeze, right? So you think about like that kid who always has a chip on their shoulder, right? Like you say good morning and they're like, what? Like they're constantly, and it's because their alarm's going off and they're looking for that next fight. They're constantly looking to defend themselves. Or that kid that is constantly trying to, I need to go to the nurse, I need to call my mom, I need to go to the library, they may have a strong flight reflex and they're constantly trying to avoid things that cause them anxiety, right? Or probably the most frustrating one to me is kiddos that freeze. So they shut down and they appear defiant because they just sit with their head down and they won't talk. And it's not defiance a lot of times. It's they're so overwhelmed that they can't respond. That one's misunderstood a lot. We're gonna watch part of this video. This is Jacob Ham, and he is a PhD and does a lot of trauma research. So he's basically breaking down a typical scenario that happened at a high school. And if you've been in a high school recently, this could look really familiar to you. So this is about 10 minutes. But I like the way he explains
The video
things.
is basically from a day in the life of a principal in Boston. And this was on CBS. Where we're going to start the video is where the principal states that in the school, hats are not allowed to be worn. Okay? And also, if you want to interrupt the video as well, just start speaking and I'll stop the video. Okay, here we go.
This is one of the rules that we're trying to work with. He took my hat. My hat was on the tip. It was now on my head. Go around, walk around, and put a hat on my head.
And conceal it hoodies.
This student is angry that his hat was confiscated by one of his teachers. A minor incident at some schools. At Madison Park, Chuck McAfee knows things can quickly spin out of control.
I put my hat on the table. Other teacher didn't have a problem with that. Why did he have a problem with it?
What are the issues that's going on here that I'm not getting?
It'd be fighting me.
See, I mean, I'm trying to figure this out. There's always two sides of the story. I mean, I can't imagine why someone come down to my office about just his hat. From he wasn't wearing his hat.
Yeah.
Why did the teacher take my hat? I don't know.
He had his hat. He left his hat in a place it wasn't supposed to be. I took his hat.
What's the point?
He doesn't really perform at any kind of acceptable level. He caught a real nasty attitude about it.
Why do I believe so?
Yeah, I know. He could be laxing about his hat. And get his hat at the end of the school day.
Or you said at lunchtime?
Well, see, I'm at lunchtime if I'm a nice guy and you don't treat me bad. When you leave here, yeah, he called me all kinds of names. He was swearing at me and everything before he was leaving. He called, no, you know me, but before he left here, I was all kinds of, MF-A-S. I said, all right.
How we doing?
Go ahead.
They say that to teachers in school?
So she said that
I do.
this is a common experience for them, that when they give children any age,
Shame.
Serious?
they respond like that, with a nasty attitude, calling me MFA, as whatever those things might mean, Mayflower, Abraham, who knows. Okay, and the typical response to that is consequences, punishments, maybe socialization about how you should behave, without really dealing with what might be triggering all of that nasty attitude, right? And so what we do as trauma experts is that we champion an understanding of children's behaviors as a consequence of trauma. And we don't know anything about this kid yet. But we usually take a universal precautions approach, meaning that any one of us could have trauma, and any of us could be reactive because of trauma. And honestly, it doesn't even matter if you don't even know whether someone has a trauma history, because you can just tell as soon as you start hearing nasty attitudes and NF and S and A, and just assume that they have trauma, because the way you deal with a traumatized person is actually a nice way to deal with everyone. Okay? Yes? Okay, so the comment is the teacher created problems by creating stress for no reason, and you're already jumping ahead to what the take-home message is actually about, like, the fact that I said that all of us are vulnerable to trauma. And what you heard from the teacher is, I took his hat because he doesn't perform in any kind of way. That makes no sense. How does taking someone's hat help them perform better in class? So again, like, just in the same way that a student can have a nasty attitude, the teacher's swearing and cursing at this kid through behaviors as well. And it's, I would argue, to assume that it's a trauma-reactive moment. And not because I'm trying to exonerate the behaviors, but I'm trying to explain how to manage the behaviors so that you're not going to have escalation of trauma reactions. Okay? Yes. Correct. So the teacher educator said she agrees that teachers also have trauma. And if you notice, you see that posture there?
Yeah.
That's defensive, right? Yep. Like all of us, we all have limbic systems. We're all warm-blooded mammals with thousands of years of evolution to know that that body language means I'm a little bit anxious right now, feeling a little attacked. Mm-hmm. And then he's blaming the student for all the things that went wrong, right? Okay, so let me explain the foundation of the trauma-informed perspective. And it really does have to do with a simple thing about fight or flight. And I will just use my hand instead of PowerPoint to describe what I mean. This is your brain. This is about, see, eyeballs here, brainstem. See, look, it turns just like my brain, same side as my brain. All sensory information travels up through the brainstem, and where my thumb is, there's an alarm in there. Or some of you science geeks who are still in school, it's called the amygdala.
So really quick, it's important to note that all information has to pass through the brainstem. So it's almost like a security guard. And if it matches anything traumatic, then it's not getting passed to make sense with your executive functioning. It's stuck in survival. Oh, yeah, we don't want to do that.
It's part of the limbic system. And the amygdala's, one hemisphere of the amygdala's entire job is just to look for threat. There's another part of the brain that kind of packages information into something that the brain can work with. And as it's doing that, the amygdala is looking at it and saying, you're okay, you're okay, you're okay. But then as soon as something potentially threatening comes on, the amygdala immediately triggers the fight or flight response. Before your body even knows what's happening, before your brain even has registered what's going on, the amygdala can get you ready to fight or flight. And you guys know what fight or flight is, right? That's the butterflies in your stomach, the heart palpitations, the high breathing, the sweaty hands and feet, and the cold, clammy. If you came and shook my hand right now, you would know exactly what fight or flight response is. Okay, so the body's getting ready already. And then the amygdala also has the power to say, wake up, to the rest of the brain, and says, pay attention to what I'm about to send you. And then it activates the hippocampus, which is like on the side of your head, so where Princess Leia's buns are. And it says, pull up everything you know about threatening things that look like this, because I might need that information. So it's priming you to already start to create associations of threat. And then finally, all that information gets channeled or processed through the sensory cortex, which is in the back and the sides of the brain, and then it all finally goes to the front. And front, if you look and open up my brain right here, you will see that it's like the Starship Enterprise. Captain Kirk sits right, I know I'm mixing metaphors. Captain Kirk, Han Solo sits right up at the front, no, Captain Kirk does. He sits right up at the front of my Starship Enterprise. And he says, okay, what's going on here? And Uhura's like, oh, the Klingons just showed up, apparated. There, I'm using Harry Potter. Apparated right in front of us, and we don't know what to do. Is it dangerous or not? And Captain Kirk has to say, no, we're on a peace mission with the Klingons, so don't pull up your shields. Or it's like, holy crap, MFSA, get everything up and running. Okay, that's a healthy brain. A healthy brain has this whole thing working for it. What happens is that if you're in a seriously dangerous situation where the Klingons really just start shooting at you, then amygdala doesn't even have to talk to Captain Kirk. Amygdala can say, all right, fight or flight, just start. Run away, punch, or whatever you have to do. And then after the danger's gone, then we'll figure out what that was all about. Yeah? Some of you have experienced that before? Where you've been almost run over by a bus and you just jumped out of the way, you're like, what was that? I can't believe that just happened. And you have like reflexes that you thought you never had. So that's your healthy survival instinct. Now what happens is that if you've ever had anything really bad happen to you, your amygdala says, that ain't ever gonna happen to me again. I'm gonna remember that thing. Next time I see a yellow bus, a yellow van, a yellow car, anything yellow, I'm gonna start jumping out of the way as soon as I can. Or if you're gonna punch it, you might try to punch it or something if you have a really strong fighting instinct. So then what I tell kids is like, if you've ever been traumatized, then your alarm never goes on green again. It always stays yellow, orange. And it's like scanning the environment for danger all the time. Or sometimes the alarm can say, I'm gonna just take over the captain's chair. I'm gonna kick Captain Kirk out, and I'm gonna have phaser set to kill all the time. And I'm gonna walk around with a chip on my shoulder. Like I had this teenage boy.
So, does that kind of make sense? Does that make some behavior make sense? So it's kind of like my needle story. Like, anytime I see something related to that, it, ugh. Same thing with dogs. Like, I would totally kick a Chihuahua because I witnessed my cousin get bit in the face by a big dog. Didn't even happen to me, but I was terrified of dogs. So if I heard like the tinkle of a dog collar, like I'm running, I'm like something bad's happening, right?
I would just kick a Chihuahua because it's a Chihuahua.
They're annoying, yeah, but like even something that I know logically couldn't hurt me, I
Like
would
a
still
A
be
Chihuahua
like,
could hurt you.
That's true.
Let's say pug.
You meditated? Oh my God.
Don't pug with her.
Not a pug, not a pug.
And talking about everything that, it's kind of like how your brain packages information. So he was talking about like the yellow bus, yellow car, yellow van. Like we even had an example, there was someone in one of our presentations and she was talking about how for the longest she would not own a red car. Like she didn't want anything to do with a red car. No idea why. She had lost her mom in a car accident when she was little, and it turns out it was a red car. And she didn't like know that until she was older and made the connection. Like, so your brain remembers, your body remembers, even if you don't. So some of those things that seem really weird, there's usually an explanation. But like I said, a lot of times our kids aren't going to be able to put two and two together, even if it's obvious sometimes. It may be obvious to us, and it can be helpful if we can talk to them like, hey, I've noticed every time such and such happens, you have this reaction. Do you think it could be because, and try to help them connect those dots, because if they can connect those dots, they can start to manage it a little better.
Stephanie, you talk about connecting those dots and your stories and how people realize why they're acting the way they are. Well, my kiddos don't have any of those family members to tell them those stories, because those family members were part of the problem. Remember, the children are so young, so they're not ever going to really know that there was a red car, or there was a needle, or there was something. So they don't have anything. They don't have those stories to tell to hear.
Yeah, how do you deal with that? Do you make them associated with something so they can go to therapy about? Well, like Like, I mean, like, would a therapist
So-
do that?
Yeah,
Like,
could, because they may not ever know the exact thing,
I'd rather not be-
but it could be like, here's a more vague example. Like that kid where when the whole classroom is quiet and peaceful and they just like flip out. And a lot of times that's because at home when things got really quiet, something bad was about to happen. So they can't handle that silence. So they create chaos because that's comfortable. Helping them understand that, or, you know, being able to figure that out. And you may not know, and you may just make that observation, and they may be able to be like, you know, like another example of teacher trauma that I kind of figured out about myself. When I started working at the intermediate school, those kids were rowdy, and there was several groups that were really loud. And when I was growing up, if my dad was yelling, like somebody was about to get like their hiney whooped. And so that makes me nervous. And so I was constantly like trying to intervene because I thought there was gonna be a fight. And then they were always like, we're just playing. And it took me a while to like get over my own like nervousness and anxiety and realize that that's just them talking and that's okay. And so just kind of figuring those things out. It may not be a specific story, and it may not be something that you can exactly say this caused this, but maybe they can start to make sense of things if you help them make those observations. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I don't know, my generation especially in middle school, had a bad habit of like flinching at people.
Uh-huh.
And there was a lot, a lot of times it was for play, but there, you know, we would talk a lot of trash
video
about it
is-
that did, you know, that like jumped out the way. And it's like, I wasn't gonna actually hit you, what you moving for? Because
Twice after that.
right,
Since the
exactly.
flinching,
You would do
flinches.
that, but the thing is, you know, that was a response to, well, there was a time when somebody did that and they weren't
Uh-huh.
playing. So
Uh-huh.
that's why my natural reaction is, a lot of people don't have that reaction. Me personally, if you flinch at me, I'm probably gonna swing first, and then we just gonna be talking. But you know, that's just, you know, that's my personal fight response
Right.
to what a lot of people have a flight response to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bullying.
That is 100% bullying. It is 100% bullying. But that's what bullying is.
It does cause trauma and it does
Well, and a lot of times,
affect the brain function.
so like another example is, oh my gosh, your mama jokes. And some of these kids would have like huge reactions.
See, no, they just sensitive because some of these kids need a few of your mama jokes.
Some of them you would like be like, dude, why are you? And it turns out their mom was in prison or their mom passed away, and so that wasn't funny to them, and that linked to a traumatic memory.
Okay, that's fair. And there was a TikTok, and like I said, Savannah, I just live on TikTok now, I have no idea why, where these kids, he was like, this is an actual conversation I witnessed, and it was funny, but he was like, oh, this kid is eating noodles and weenies for lunch, and then the kid that was eating noodles and weenies turned to the other kid and was like, but aren't you on free lunch? And so I relayed that to my my roommate, and he was like, you know, it's funny. He's like, he was with a group of his friends, and you know, his friend was on the phone, and he was like, hey, chill, you guys, I'm on the phone with my daddy, and they started talking about it because like, oh, you got a dad, and so a lot of that, and he was like, hey, are you guys actually like upset that I have a dad? I'm like, no, we're not. But you got a dad though, so it's like a lot of that people take as playing can also be serious.
Yeah.
They need to get out their bubble.
Yeah.
So bullying used to be good for the
So
kids.
if 2 out of 3 children have had some kind of a trauma event, then 2 out of 3 children are going to be triggered by something. And so we need to help them figure out what triggers them.
Yes.
And help them to be able to function in society rather than everybody tiptoeing around
Yes.
them.
Thank
Okay.
you.
It's them figuring out their triggers and
Yes.
being able to identify them when they're
Yeah.
being triggered.
They
Yeah.
need to be able to like either verbalize that or remove themselves from a situation
Mhm.
or figure out how to like
Yeah.
translate that for.
And once they can figure out those triggers, then they can make a plan for, okay, this is how I'm gonna handle it. But if you are not even aware that that is And let's be fair, I don't like the word triggered.
Thank
because
you, thank you.
It's become
It's
a
triggering
cultural-
me.
It's become a
Jesus
cultural thing, like,
Christ.
oh, it's not
Okay.
triggered.
Well, okay, so it's just been overused?
Yes,
So
Okay,
when I was
what's
in.
and misused.
What would be a better word?
No, that's the
Nothing,
correct
just
word.
walk away.
Yeah,
It's just been misused and trivialized.
okay.
But then a lot of
Context that I
people
was
just
speaking
use
of, I
it
didn't
just
mean
to use it.
Yes.
I didn't mean to trivialize that word.
No,
It's just
you
a word
weren't,
I know.
but I
No,
can
it's
see
funny,
her
but you're right,
face.
Murph, you're right though, but the thing is, like I said, I was in CPS, so with me being in, the foster care, like, system piece, like
It's
the,
really overused
Hector
there.
Garza, they'll be like, oh, you're triggering me, and then it started to be like, can you just shut up,
Rather
because
than-
you're not being triggered.
Rather than like saying what.
They were
using that
almost
as a-
malingering, but not
Yeah.
malingering.
Okay, yeah.
It's,
Do you have a question?
Yes, I worked with, my last, I did with school for a long time, but the last 9 years I worked in it was alternative school. And those kids there, when they come in the morning, I mean, they're ready to, they can, one day they'll love you, the next day they can curse you out. But we have to say, don't take it personal, because it's not anything directed to you. It's something that they're going through, and you have to learn how to not take things personal when you're dealing with trauma kids, because, I mean, they're up and down, and,
Yeah.
yeah.
So we're,
They need to take responsibility as well, like, I think we should be helping them to figure out what it is that sets them off so that they can function in society,
But remember, we're
right?
not gonna be their therapist.
No,
all
everything
kids
sets
are
them
not gonna be
off.
receptive.
No, no, no.
Kids an alternative in the school I was in, everything sets them off. I mean, you can look at them wrong, or you can sneeze and they can get, I mean, you know, you just can't
Their pencils
diagnose
can be sharpened the
everyone.
wrong
You just
way.
have to
Yeah.
learn
No.
how
and
to.
you, and
It's
that's
okay
not
to
what I'm saying, like, I'm not saying you need to be their therapist, but if you
You need to
see
just
that,
advocate
every
for them
time-
too, I think the other
yes.
one. Yeah.
and if they get in trouble for something and you're like, were you aware
Yeah.
that this could have caused this?
And a lot of them are, and they just don't care. Like, when I was acting up in school, 9 times out of 10, 5 times out of 10, I was just doing it because I knew that I was either gonna get the attention that I wanted, or I was gonna get the attention I wanted, or I wanted to cause a ruckus. So it's kind of like,
7.5 out of 10.
right, yeah, 7 out of 10. 7 out of 10.
9.5 out of 10.
Majority of the times I should have been
Be
punished.
advocating on both sides, advocating with the kid's therapist, letting the therapist know that these events are happening,
Mm-hmm.
but then also advocating within the school to just kind of say, hey, there's a history here.
Yeah,
And how much of that history can we share? Supervisor? Yeah.
Like, for,
Like
to the
who-
school?
Yeah, like to the teacher.
Administrators or whatnot.
Can we like say, hey, you know, this kid has had a lot of emotional trauma and these things may be triggers for him.
Or at least
I
the
don't think
counselors.
you need to go into detail of like, hey, this kid's been through this, and this, so this is why it's a trigger, but maybe talking to them and saying, hey, I noticed when this and this is done, you know, due to his history or her history,
Due to
it
his
could be,
history.
yeah, I don't
Okay.
think going into detail, I mean, 'cause
Yeah.
you can't do that, and I don't.
Yeah,
But
I
you,
think that
you
we
can ask the teacher to watch out for things
Yeah,
and begin to make those connections, because that's gonna help you.
Yeah.
And the teachers are with them 8 hours a
So
day.
we're advocating, by letting the teacher know there's some, trauma, and then also letting the counselor know of these
So that they
incidents that are happening, so that the counselor can maybe address that in
Yes.
counseling.
And the
Yes.
teacher can say, you know, every time it's quiet time,
Yeah, I
this
know.
happens.
Yeah.
Or every time
Yeah.
someone drops a book, this happens.
Yeah.
So if you can ask your teachers to watch out for that.
or ask them, do you, so when
Do
you,
you
when the
notice certain
student is
events?
doing, when the student does this, like when he starts to act out, whatever, do you notice if there's anything that leads up to it? What happened
Yeah.
today, and things like
Okay.
that, you can ask, yeah.
and you can also say, I attended this really great training.
Yes.
You should go.
Matter of fact, I think I have the paper in my back
It's in
pocket.
Region 6, it's free to go.
I'll even go to them.
Looks
Okay,
great on your
somebody
resume.
has a question?
A statement, it stands to reason in my head, and in my head, and y'all may not agree. But I'm a CASA, and I go to that school, and I have to identify myself as a CASA. I have to give them my appointment letter. That child also has a CPS caseworker that should be going there, so that teacher should automatically assume, do they not assume that
They,
there's something?
a lot of times, they don't even tell the teacher.
Okay.
This is a huge issue.
Yeah, they just
There
get
were
called out of
many
class.
times as the school counselor that I didn't know they had a CASA. I think I met with one CASA advocate in my entire career.
Is it because the CASA never came in and introduced themselves, or is it just?
No, they call the student down.
Cause our CASAs,
Yeah.
they email, they get in
Yeah, they-
contact with these
Our
counselors.
counselors are the bomb.
Yeah, so I mean, and granted, that's been a couple of years, but sometimes I think there's assumed communication that's not happening, and
Yeah.
teachers are definitely left out of the loop a lot.
Especially if the student don't like you, because I told my teachers that I liked everything.
Right.
They didn't know.
But as
until I
far
told
as
them.
adults communicating, teachers are left out of the loop a lot. There's a lot of times, and there is confidentiality concerns, but I was always of the opinion that the kids with that teacher all day, they need to know at least
Something.
If
this
there's
baby's
no
having a hard time.
change.
At least, at the very least, but that doesn't happen everywhere. And so there are teachers that have no clue that there's anything going on with this kid, other than they won't quit acting up in my class.
Yeah.
And that creates situations where you don't like them, because, yeah. So, okay, common responses to trauma, I just put it all on one slide because a lot of them are similar, but in young children, you might see changes in sleeping and eating, separation anxiety, regressed behaviors, so maybe they were potty trained and now they're having accidents, or they, talk in baby talk, and then reenacting aspects of the event in their play. So if they're playing, you'll see them like reenacting things. In school-age children, difficulty concentrating, anger outbursts, aggression and withdrawal, over or under reaction to situations in the environment. So maybe they're really jumpy, or they have no reaction at all. A lot of times, trauma response mimics ADHD, and I'm of the opinion that there are a lot of children that are misdiagnosed.
Yes.
Because we're not asking why we can't concentrate, we're just saying we can't concentrate.
Here's the drugs.
Yeah.
Yes.
it
Is
is.
the medication the same?
There is no medication for trauma, there's therapy.
I thought they
And
were
that's
they
the
made
issue.
You cannot
something for
medicate
PTSD.
trauma, you can only go through therapy for it?
Do what?
You're saying you cannot medicate trauma?
You
you-
medicate
So-
the symptoms.
Symptoms, you can medicate symptoms, you can
Like
take
anxiety,
anxiety
yeah.
medication and things like
Or
that, but that's
over-the-counter
not gonna
shit.
fix the root issue.
Yeah.
So you think about that kid, that
Yeah.
they're like, well, this medicine keeps wearing off and it's not working, and we need to change medicines, it's probably because that's not really the issue.
Right.
Because if it was strictly ADHD and that's just a brain function thing, then it wouldn't be.
I mean, and can't you see that in brain scans? And most kids ain't getting brain scans anyways.
I think it gets overlooked a lot, but we're starting to see a lot more research about it, so hopefully that'll change.
How do you advocate for a kid that's on, that has been diagnosed with ADHD, but also has had a lot of trauma in his life? How do you ask someone to relook at that?
I mean, I guess it would depend on what professionals are in their life. But I think you can definitely make the case for, are we addressing both? It's possible they have ADHD, but they have a lot of trauma, are we addressing that?
Okay,
Because if we're strictly medicating,
okay.
then we're probably not doing what we could for that kiddo. That's not a real solution, that's a temporary Band-Aid.
Which is why it doesn't work long
Trauma
term,
therapy
because we have
and
to change it.
behavior therapy, are those the same things?
Do what?
Are behavior therapy and trauma therapy the same things?
Cognitive therapy sucks.
Behavior therapy is more focused on like shaping behavior, and other theories, those are more focused on,
Would you say that some trauma therapy is better left unaddressed until they're ready to unpack it as adults?
I think that you have to do that at the level they are at. So here's the thing with kids, and I'll say this quick and then we're gonna move on.
Thanks.
A lot of times when they've experienced something traumatic when they're younger, maybe they go to therapy and then they're fine, and then they hit like 7, 8, they understand it on a different level, you have to address it again. And then they're kind of okay, and then they hit like 14, 15, and they understand it on a different level, a different developmental level, and then you'll see it. They're like, if we went to therapy, they were fine, I don't know where this is coming from. And it's because they're experiencing life events and understanding it differently, right? So let's say, for example, you lost your dad when you were very young, and you address daddy's gone, you know, and it's like, okay, I've accepted that. And then, you know, you hit your teenage years and you're dating and your, you know, life is different and you understand the permanence of that differently. And you have to like unpack it again on a different level.
It never actually goes away.
Yeah. And then, you know, you get to like 25 and you're getting married and you have to like
Yeah, it's like a lifetime. kind of
reprocess.
thing,
Yeah, but I think if
Yeah.
you wait to address it, then you end up with a lot of people self-medicating.
So I would say you have to address it on the developmental level that they're at. And then just be prepared that you're probably gonna address it
Have
again.
to talk about it again.
Yeah, it's not just like, oh, we fixed that. I mean, it's better to address it as you go, but it's not surprising to me that a lot of times kids will need to, they'll pass and get released from therapy and then have to readdress it later.
Sure.
Yeah.
And we only have a short time with them to try and advocate and give them services.
Yeah.
And that's why in training, we say not to measure by outcomes, but by progress. Because if you've changed that child's life even 1%, you've changed that child's life.
And maybe you could take that time to reiterate that they will go
Yeah.
look for help. If you can reiterate
Yeah.
that in them, yeah.
And that's totally normal.
Yeah.
To expect it.
Because I look back at stuff people told me at 16, I'm like, oh, you know, I can do that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna skip this video, but basically, it's talking about how our trauma reactions are better seen as adaptations versus problem behaviors. So like there's a situation in here where the kiddo has witnessed a lot of domestic violence and he's on swim team and somebody dumps him and he like, you know, freaks out because in his home environment that protects him and in this environment it's not. It gets them in trouble. So that can be, but if we can view that as adaptation and not a problem behavior and work with them on, I get why you needed that, but you don't need it here.
And if you want to watch it, you can write that down, Childhood Trauma and the Brain, UK Trauma Council, if you want to watch it later.
I can send you the links to all the videos. And then the other thing that's really interesting from this video is that our negative memories become more salient as we go along and our positive memories become more blurry. And that's again, your brain trying to be in survival mode. So it saves these negative, like you need to watch out for these situations. So when you have a kiddo that's experienced a lot of trauma, when they're meeting new people, that colors how they view that situation. Like a kiddo that's not experienced trauma that sees a new kid bebopping up is probably like, oh, they want to be my friend. Whereas a kid that has experienced a lot of trauma is probably like, what are they gonna do to me? Do I need to, like, should I run away? They have a different, they see things differently.
My mom gets mad at me and my sisters because we always bring up the negative stuff and she goes, I took you to Disneyland. And we're like, we don't remember that.
Yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Because, and it's unfortunate, but it's true. Just to mention, we know, and we talked a little bit about, but culture also